Well, forget about candidates flip-flopping. My next guest says the press is singing a very different tune when it comes to the presumptive GOP nominee, Donald Trump. He writes, quote, "Suddenly, abruptly, the press is viewing Donald Trump as a potential president. The business that gave him no chance of winning the nomination is starting to change its tune." So how did we get here? Howard Kurtz is a Fox News media analyst. He's the host of MediaBuzz on Fox News Channel. Howie, thanks for joining us. So I was reading your article, and it reminded me of sometimes I'm out and a viewer will come up to me and, you know, it's somebody who really doesn't like Donald Trump, and I'll say, you need to begin to mentally prepare yourself for the idea that he might be the president. He has a chance of winning. And they'll say, no. No, he definitely does not. Just pure denial because they dislike him so much. Your article reminded me there are people like that in the media, but you say they're starting to come around?
Yeah, and it's an interesting moment. I mean, I always get on my soapbox and say, look, polls are snapshots, they can be wrong, and these polls will change 50 times between now and November. But for so long, most of the media and anti-Trump Republicans told us that a Trump nomination would be a suicidal, it would be a debacle for the GOP, and it kind of became conventional wisdom. So here he is just a couple of weeks after essentially clinching. We've got a Fox News poll that shows him up 3 points, essentially a margin of error over Hillary Clinton. There's a New York Times poll today showed him trailing Hillary by 6, but a very competitive race. And that has changed the political conversation. I think some of these journalists and pundits are starting to treat the Trump campaign with just a tad more respect.
Just a tad more respect, but they're not all the way there.
Well, you know, most of them would say, and I would not dispute, that the electoral map favors the Democrats and therefore it might be an uphill climb for Donald Trump. But remember all that we've heard about his unfavorables, and women don't like him, and African Americans don't like him, and Muslims don't like him. Somehow, magically, if these polls are anywhere near accurate, he looks to be a guy who never ran for office before, looks to be in a competitive situation against a former First Lady, Senator, and Secretary of State. That's a sea change in this sort of media mindset. You
also can tell a lot by the facts and the parts of polls that different media personalities flock to. I mean, here's one set, and you can kind of guess who would pick one. You could say, well, on one hand, Trump has a 24-point edge among white voters. The other side would say, well, Clinton dominates black votes by 83%, Hispanic votes by 39%. Any one of those facts taken alone is really compelling for one side or the other, but you group them together and all of a sudden you're like, there you go. I don't know.
Right, and the fact remains that both these candidates are pretty unpopular. Both have high negatives, and that is a very unusual situation. But I think these numbers are sort of bad news for the never Trump crowd. I mean, just this week, Washington Post had a front-page story about how grassroots conservatives are gearing up to still try to deny him the nomination in Cleveland by unbinding the delegates. And, of course, there's talk on the right of a third-party conservative bid that I think would hand the White House to Hillary Clinton. Well, if the argument is that Trump would be a disaster for the Republican Party, and you look at these numbers, then you have to say, unless you just hate the guy or think on principle he shouldn't be president, maybe he's not going to be as a bit of a disaster or as much of a disaster as some pundits predicted.
So, Howie, as a seasoned media analyst, what advice do you give to pundits out there who said that he could never have the nomination? We saw a couple famously, and now I regret that his name is slipping my mind, who ate his column. You know, he said if he becomes the nominee, I will eat these words. And he did a great job serving up his column to himself to sort of humbly eat crow and his own column. What would
that would be Dana Milbank of the Washington Post. And yes, you know, few other people could probably have that kind of meal as well. What I would say is go to pundit re-education school, because it's not so much that they were wrong about this or that candidate. They completely and totally misjudged the election and the anger and frustration that Donald Trump and to some extent Bernie Sanders have tapped into. Be a little more cautious making predictions, because you know what? It's on videotape.
Yeah. Although I would say, I mean, in everyone's defense, this has been an incredibly unusual election, and I don't think there was anyone except maybe Donald Trump on the day he announced who thought that it was going to turn out like this. I wonder if even Melania knew. Probably
Donald
not.
Trump told me in our first interview last year that he thought he had a 15 to 20% chance of being the GOP nominee. So even he is surprised on some level. Yes, it's a crazy year, but on the other hand, many stayed in denial too long as the evidence accumulated that Trump was going to win this nomination.
Wonderful conclusion. We'll leave it there. You're so right.